Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Iran. This is Iran's flag. It's famous for the saber and tulip. And of course, the language right here, which is Farsi, which says Allah Akbar, which is God is great. And y- this is really the basis of Iran. Is It is steeped in Islam and Sharia law. Let's understand that most of the population lives in the north, especially around Tehran, which is its capital, about 67% of the population. Iranians are not Arabs. Arabs would be here on the Arabian Peninsula, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Yemen. They are Persian, and therefore they speak Farsi, though you will see English often on road signs and street signs as well. The largest ethnic population is Persian, but the other one we would want, if there is any ethnic cleavage at all, it's going to be this region bordering Iraq and Turkey. That is Kurdistan. That is going to be the land of the Kurds. Masha Amini, she who died due to the morality police beating her to death because of her hijab. Um, she was Kurdish, and this event took place in that area of Kurdistan. Notice the demography here. We have a little bit of an older population up top. It narrows right here due to the Iran-Iraq war. That's why you have a smaller, younger demographic. The basis of Iranian culture and society is Islam. Islam literally means submission to God. There are five pillars of the Islamic faith. One, that there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. Number two, Islamic societies are insanely charity driven, almost to the poor to try to the community to take care of itself. Number three is five times a day you turn towards Mecca and you pray. That is the Adhan. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, which you see here on the screen, where they go around the Kaaba. There's a lot of uh, things you do. It's not just that in Mecca, and then fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, and from sunup to sundown, you do not eat during that time. Of course, faith is varied. There are some people that are they are Muslim, but they're not active practicing Muslims, and there are people that are very adherent to the traditions of the faith. Um, Iran has 99 for over 99% of Iranians are Muslim. Uh, the largest Muslim country on the planet right now is Indonesia. Uh, and India is eventually going to eclipse that with 1.4 billion people. Notice, though, it only has about 15% of the country being Muslim, and actually, most of the Muslims in India are um, there's some slight racism and ethnic look down from the more nationalist Hindu population. So Iran is guided by Sharia law. The concept of Sharia is that you live a righteous life through divine guidance of God. And Sharia law is essentially a system of codes and laws that regulates all of society: religion, your civil criminal interactions, your family, your morals, your politics, economics. All of it is driven by this idea of Sharia. And there are countries and regions around the world that practice Sharia. Much of the Middle East, parts of Northern Africa, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all full Sharia states. But then you have family law, things about marriage, the role of women in the household, who gets the children in terms of divorce and that kind of thing. This is places also in Northern Africa and then Bangladesh as well. There are regions. The UAE has specific city states that are fully Sharia. Indonesia, Malaysia, northern Nigeria has, of course, Sharia law. And then there's population areas in India. The Philippines have certain islands that have Sharia. Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana all have regions of the country that are under that concept of Sharia law, which can be quite strict. Now, there are two sects of Islam. One is Sunni, the other is Shia. And religiously, it's supposed to be like who is supposed to take over when Muhammad died, and Sunnis believed it was some kind of friend, and uh, the Shia believed that it was a cousin. Now, when it comes down to it, it's more political in terms of the schism between the religions. but 90% of the world's followers are actually Sunni Muslims. And really, you focus on the Quran and you have kind of more of a personal interpretation of what that Quran means, depending on the sect that you join. When you're a Shia Muslim, Iran is the basic Shia epicenter of Shia Islam. And you have, instead of the Quran being interpreted by the person, you have ayatollahs, which are grand clerics that actually interpret the Quran because they are considered closer to God than you are. So it's much like more like the Catholic faith when it comes down to it. So Iran, we're dealing with Shia Islam here because most Iranians, 89% are Shia Muslims. Sunnis aren't necessarily like, oh, you're bad, but you're not going to be able to hold government office. You're not going to be considered like a full Muslim, proper Muslim, if you are a Sunni Muslim in Iran. So let's start from the beginning. Islam comes in the 1500s under a group called the Safavids. The population is forced to become Muslims, and there is a creation of a Persian king known as a Shah. And Iraq is also primarily Shia. So the connection here is that you have a king, an Islamic king known as a Shah, and the Shah's essentially that concept of a Shah is going to rule all the way up until 1979 in the Islamic Revolution. You then have the Qajaris who come to power in almost 1800, and they start to canoodle with the West, especially as you get into the 1900s when oil is discovered in Iran and there's a real strong connection with the United Kingdom. Now, here's the thing: you have to make sure the poor in Iran, which you have poor Muslims in Iran, when you start canoodling with the West, who are clearly, not really a super religious society, that leads to a lot of discontent. And the Shah is kind of pushed at this time. That current Shah in 19 aughts is pushed to create some kind of systemic governmental change, and this leads us to the first Constitution of 1906. It creates separation of powers, a little more rule of law. People get more of a say in government. You get the elected Western type institutions. You have a president. Yes, you have a Shah, but the people are going to elect a president. You're also going to have a parliament. That president's going to have a cabinet that's going to advise them. So you have all these institutions here that are created in the 1906 Constitution. And we're looking a little more Western. Now, the Shah is still there, but like the power is more centered around the president and of that parliament. You get religious minorities get a voice in this parliament. They're guaranteed seats, and this module, of course, the module still exists today, but it was created under this 1906 Constitution. But a debate starts coming up on whether Sharia law and or Islam and democracy actually can coexist. Because still inside the country, you have to be a good Shia Muslim to be part of the cabinet. The clerical courts still could interpret, localized Sharia law within the country. We got to remember that Sharia and democracy kind of they conflict because in democracy, all individuals are equal under the law and have inalienable rights, including the right to choose your own path in terms of religious faith. In Sharia law, there's inequality all over the place. A man and a woman is not the same. A Muslim and a non-Muslim are not the same. Even legitimate minorities, people of the book in the Quran, even if you are Jewish or Christian, the gap between them and an infidel, an unbeliever, is not the same. And so, the rights in a state of nature, as John Locke would call it, in democracy are natural. You're guaranteed them. While in Sharia, your rights come from God, and they can be adjusted and taken away based on the interpretation of that religious faith. As we get into the 1920s, eventually there is a coup, and a family takes power called the Pahlavis. And the Pahlavis come to power and immediately pretty much start to dump the idea that popular sovereignty is going to work. The Colonel Reza Pahlavi re-ups the power of the Shah, institutes the policy of that he is going to be the Shah, the king of kings. And then he has a son, Mohammad Reza Shah. and he takes power during World War II. They kind of ally with the British against the Nazi Germany, and the son, Mohammad Reza Shah, is going to be known kind of in popular culture and around the world as the Shah. So we're not going to use him in terms of like the name Mohammad Reza Shah. He's just referenced as the Shah going forward. Okay. Um, Obviously, a man of royalty. You see the son, so divine guidance from God. He's a king. He's got the saber. He's powerful like a lion. He's filthy, filthy rich. Most of Iran is still relatively poor. He is allied with the United States, both Republicans and Democrats, including Jimmy Carter, and he's really a nasty little dictator. The Shah has the 55th largest military in the world. He creates something called the Savak, which is a secret police known for oppressing any kind of political opposition, throwing them in jail, torture, public executions. Um, you still have that Constitution of 1906, but basically the Shah co-opts all the institutions. He makes the Majlis a rubber stamp institution where they're just going to pass whatever policy he wants. He starts to get rid of Sharia law. He declines the power of the mosque and the Muslim clerics and starts to say, we're going to be more European based, more Western based. He takes over the media. He creates the parastatal of the Iranian oil company. He basically nationalizes banking. He's taken over the state himself. Now, even though it is a dictatorship, if you're not a politically active person going up against him, it's a it's still a fairly westernized society. So this is Iran in the 1950s. You'll notice skirts. You notice that when you get into the 60s, you have the same kind of the 60s around the world where there's this revolution in values as well, where civil rights and civil liberties were being protested around the world, but also fashion, women's rights, the that free love kind of air wasn't just the United States; it happened everywhere. Women were working in school, were working. They were also attending universities. They got the right to vote in around 1962. Vogue magazine even went to Iran and did this whole, you know, fashion makeup thing. So we have a very kind of almost westernized society, but it was a dictatorship. This is an example of where things kind of start going a little bit off the rails. In 1953, there is an election that is held, and in a stunning victory, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, with Communist Party support, takes power as prime minister, and his power amongst the common people in the middle class like grows super big. He starts talking about nationalizing the oil companies and taking them away from any kind of influence from the West. And the Shah is actually forced to flee a popular revolution. And yes, Mohammad Mossadegh was elected. So the Shah goes back to the United States and to the British and say, look, you're going to lose access to this oil unless we do something. And so the CIA and MI6, both secret intelligence for the US and Britain, go in, overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh in a coup, and put the dictator, the Shah, back in power. Why? Of course, oil. Because Iran is a rentier state and gets most of its overall revenue from that. And, Iran's entire economic system is based on that idea, which is why it's considered having a resource curse. So, from now on, the United States is kind of seen as a meddler, a hypocrite in talking about democratic processes, and is known as kind of the great Satan by much of the poor in Iran, in Iranian society. The Shah, meanwhile, as you get into the 1970s, gets more and more repressive. He starts taking away land from the mosques and giving them to more elites, trying to keep the more cosmopolitan happy, try to keep it more Western. There's like a real strong movement to be more like, have Tehran be more like Paris or London or Vienna or Rome. So he's ignoring the poor, focuses on these major cities, and they're the lower class. Much of the Muslims support his overthrow. He's jailing and killing his political opponents. So you have academics and activists, going to prison. So the upper class is supporting the overthrow, and this means you only have one group left. It's going to be the group that's going to, in like most cases, that are going to kick things off, and it has to do with um, basically the economic middle class. So you have the price of oil. Notice here about 1978, the price of oil spikes. That's good for Iran, but then it just plunges. And as the oil plunges, and since almost half of the GDP of Iran is based in oil, when that price of oil goes down, the entire economy just collapses. It's an economic calamity. And now you have the middle class saying, well, I'm oppressed and poor, and people aren't buying our goods and services if you're a small time business or a bazaari. And goodbye. Islamic Revolution happens. A man in neighboring Iraq who had been exiled from Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, has been sending messages since the mid 1970s that Iran should rise up and revolt against the Shah. He is a huge critic of the United States. Also, he takes audio messages, puts them on cassettes, puts people on motorbikes, sends them into Iran, riles up mammoth amounts of people. And the Ayatollah, the Grand Cleric Khomeini, ends up pushing the Shah, who flees again from Iran and goes to the West. Eventually, he dies from cancer. And in a fairly bloodless revolution, Khomeini essentially steps off a plane and takes over. The armed groups pretty much took over all the institutions of the Iranian government, the Iranian military. It's not really, it's it's over, and we have a regime change in 1979 in the Islamic Revolution. There's a national referendum that goes out and it says, should we be an Islamic republic? 97% truly endorse that change. So Ayatollah Khomeini creates uh, an edict that says the constitution is going to be made by a group of religious experts. So this is known as the Assembly of Experts. They craft a new constitution in 1979, 1980 that puts the power into the hands of the Ayatollah, and he is known from then on as the supreme leader. Now, you need to get the people on board. There's been a revolution. You start to enforce that the Sharia law, which of course is a little more oppressive to women. How do you get the citizens to come together in a common, unified form? You galvanize around the flag, and so Saddam Hussein in Iraq in 1980 notices that Iran is destabilized because of the revolution. He jumps in, tries to attack Iran, and it turns into an 8-year war. It's really bloody, really brutal. About 2 million people die. There's uh, chemical weapons used. It's really bad, and but it does rally the people of Iran around the supreme leader to fight off the dictator Saddam Hussein. So this was the new Iranian government. A lot of these, the Assembly of Experts, the Guardian Council, the Expediency Council, the Supreme Leader, all these things start to come out during the Islamic Revolution, and they're passed by the Assembly of Experts. The country is now governed not under like a secular law or coded law. It's done by something known as Vilayat Faqih, which is the jurist guardianship. Essentially, the people that deal with the law and morals and edicts of society are going to be senior clerics, and clerics where they're getting divine guidance from Allah that is going to decide how things are run here. And so the most powerful institution that's going to really impact society is going to be the Guardian Council. And the Guardian Council, of course, it has the ability to veto laws from the Majlis, but its most powerful piece is to be able to vet candidates for any elected position. And as we're going to notice, there's a lot of elected positions, so the Guardian Council has an enormous amount of influence. The first and probably one of the most important elected positions is your ability to be on the Assembly of Experts. There are 86 members, no females. They are elected for 8-year terms, but their job is to actually elect the supreme leader, and actually has the right to dismiss the supreme leader. Of course, if the Guardian Council is vetting the candidates on who can be on the Assembly of Experts, then eventually the supreme leader is going to get what they want, because the supreme leader, of course, chooses half the Guardian Council, and the head of the judiciary, who is picked by the supreme leader, gets to select the other half. So it's the Guardian Council, definitely just the most powerful institution in the country. The Iranian parliament is known as the Majlis. They do more of the coded legal law, not really having to do a whole lot with Sharia. All citizens over 18 can vote. The election system is first past the post, but you have to get at least 25%, or the top two candidates have to run a month later in a runoff election. The Guardian Council, of course, can vet all the candidates that come here too. And it's so what has happened is that if you look here in 2016, where the reformists had a lot more power, now in 2020, the conservatives, the principalists, have the majority of power in the Majlis. The reformists have pretty much been purged from the Iranian government. A newer institution is known as the Expediency Council. It was created to kind of resolve conflicts between the coded law Majlis and the Sharia law Guardian Council. But what it's become more is this secretive legislative assembly of very, very small people, 6 jurists from the Guardian Council, the Majlis speaker, the chief judge, a bunch of clerics, the president, and they basically are only accountable to the supreme leader, and they can actually create new laws if they want to. They are really secret. Not a whole lot of people know about them, but it's kind of like the center of power that nobody really knows a whole lot about. But still, remember, the Guardian Council is considered in government the much more influential institution. The supreme leader, who is currently Ali Khamenei, can do all these dang things. Don't worry, it's not like they just basically are all encompassing. Notice, determine the interests of Islam. He's closer to God, sets political guidelines. He can dismiss the president, get rid of judges, nominate judges, all kinds of fun things. He is just a super powerful dude. Remember that clerics make policy. The legislators and the Majlis don't really make the policy. They just more, you know, um, they're just kind of like the legal mechanism, but the Sharia law and the clerics are the primary influencers. Technocrats are not nearly as common anymore. The academics, science-driven, empirical-driven. It's still the conservatives have taken over, and they're mainly clerics and more hardliners of religion. Political parties don't really matter in Iran. It's more of if you're a reformer or a conservative. I've not seen an Iranian political party in an AP exam yet since 2008. There are reformist politicians that you might want to know that are brought up in conversation. Mohammad Khatami and Hashemi Rafsanjani were both former presidents in the 1990s up until 2005. They were more reformist. They engaged and negotiated with the West. Pretty much after the Iraq War started, that feeling of that reform movement towards reform in connection with the West pretty much went away. Mir Hussein Mousavi, we're going to get to him, and he is connected with the Green Revolution. Couple of figures. The president is the head of government. He's got a 4-year term. He can serve that twice. You have a direct election. It is done by majority runoff. There's of course universal suffrage. You get an absolute majority in the first round, you win. If not, then the top two run a week later. And remember, the Guardian Council gets to approve who's going to be on the ballot. Okay. To be a president, you must be between 21 and 75. You must be male. Something known as the well-known personality clause bars women constitutionally from serving as president. And you must be, of course, Shia. So you cannot be a Sunni Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Zoroastrian, or any other religious minorities. You have to be a good practicing Shia Muslim. You don't necessarily have to be a cleric. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was a mayor but he wasn't actually a religious official. So some of the presidents, if we go in order, and supreme leaders, the two supreme leaders are Ayatollah Khomeini. He was body surfed down the center of Tehran for miles after he died in 1989. The current supreme leader is Ali Khamenei. He is old, frail, and they're looking for a new supreme leader going forward. In the 80s into the 90s, you had Hashemi Rafsanjani, another reformist. and Mohammad Khatamai up until 2005, also a reformist. In 2005, there is an election. Notice our first round, second round. The winner is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He is a ultra hardcore conservative, non-religious, in terms of like he's not a religious figure, but he is a Shia Muslim. But he is hardcore, ultra conservative. Former mayor of Tehran. He becomes president. He is the first non-cleric in the 24 years since the founding of the Islamic Republic. He annoyed everybody. He was just a pain in the rear. So the West, as he would do things like deny that the Holocaust exists, he would antagonize Israel, call out the United States and the UK. He would act in ways that people thought were not of good faith. In terms of religion, he would say he is the second coming of like not Christ, but like some kind of figure that Islam, like almost like a savior that was going to come. That light surrounded him, and the clerics would look at him, and go, "Dude, you're a little nutty." Especially did this during his second term. He was very oppressive and nasty to opposition figures. He had his own private militia known as the Basij that backed him up and engaged in violence against groups he did not like. He got into a fight with the Speaker of the Majlis. He would often call them out. And sometimes he would annoy the Supreme Leader because he acted like he was bigger than them. And sometimes the Supreme Leader, like he basically fired the president's entire cabinet one time just to remind him, you're the president. You ain't the head cheese. This brings us to the 2009 presidential election. This was between Mir Hussein Mousavi, the reformist, and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. First ever presidential debate was in 2009. Most people stated out there it was pretty clear that Mousavi was going to win. Uh, Ahmadinejad was kind of an annoyance, not very popular, everything else. Well, here's the results. Ahmadinejad got 62% of the vote. The problem is, um, this result was actually put out hours before the polling places had closed. And so this created an enormous amount of outrage, and the public took to the streets. By the way, notice that almost 500 candidates applied to be president, only 4 were actually allowed to run. This is the beginning of voter turnout starting to drop down because people didn't feel like the voter efficacy was happening. Their votes didn't really matter. So people got out in the street. A couple other things happened during this election. Uh, Mir Hussein Mousavi's office was burned. There was an assassination attempt against former reformist President Khatami. Um, they cut off mobile phone service, cell service in Tehran. They blocked opposition radio. Facebook was banned. Election observers were banned from polling places and counting offices. It was all just an enormous uh, red flag that the election had been rigged. And so people got out in the streets and protested. There were cartoons about it. Nobody really knew what was going on in terms of the protests until people got this new social media app called Twitter, and you started to see video and reports of opposition leaders being not only beaten but killed, people being dragged out of their homes and shot by the Basij. And remember, that is Ahmadinejad's kind of paramilitary, the militia. Then you have Neda Sultan. She is a college student that's walking down a street in Tehran. She happens upon one of the protests. The Basij shoot into the crowd, hits her in the throat, and she starts bleeding out on the street and dies. Somebody uploads it to YouTube, and worldwide condemnation comes over the whole, not only the election, but how the Iranian government is oppressing its people, shooting them, killing them. And it becomes, again, a worldwide kind of condemnation on what's going on. Eventually, the supreme leader steps in, says the vote stands. We're keeping it, and they become even more oppressive, and the Green Revolution kind of ends. It lasts for a couple of months, but uh, again, the question became, where's the next revolution? And the next one comes in the 2020s. In 2013, the country goes moderate with Hassan Rouhani. He's basically like this bridge between the green movement reformist and the clergy. He's basically goes back to, okay, we're not going to be this conservative versus reformist. I just want to make sure the Iranian economy does well. Because of the new, Iran trying to develop nuclear weapons, the United States put sanctions on Iran. This does not improve the economy at all, and the economy continues to kind of wane. In 2017, Hassan Rouhani wins again. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad tried to run, and the Guardian Council says, "Yeah, that ain't going to happen." But this new guy comes in. His name is Ibrahim Raisi. He doesn't get a majority of the vote, but people look at him as potentially somebody who's going to win down the line. And by the way, voter turnout has dropped considerably until 2021. Ibrahim Raisi wins the presidency. Hardliner. He used to be in charge of the prison system and actually has ordered the execution of thousands of political prisoners during the 80s into the early 90s. So this guy is a hardcore hardliner. So when you see 72%, like voter turnout was really, really, really low in Iran. So this guy is not necessarily a very popular guy. And of course, in 2024, he died in a helicopter crash. And right now, Iran is under a caretaker government, meaning there is currently no real president. Iran, when they had the Islamic Revolution, also had a revolution in overall values. So the Shah's secularism and Western influence were gone. Immediately, the Sharia-led forces under the Ayatollah purged the universities of any serious academics and liberals. All opposition was oppressed. You weren't allowed alcohol. You couldn't have magazines where males or females showed any skin. Makeup was discouraged. Men started to grow their beards much longer. Very standard Sharia practices. Now, this support for the regime pretty much comes from the peasant or lower middle class, which there are a lot of. Most of the middle upper class groups are more like religion should be much less a part of government and society. You will notice these things as themes when you do reading Lolita in Tehran or Persepolis. You'll, especially when you get into Persepolis, you'll notice that Marjan's parents are are essentially academics. They're the upper middle class, and they are more critical of the clergy that exists within the Islamic State. Okay? Women got the right to vote in 1963. They were allowed in universities in the 30s, and now they are over half the students, even though that the universities are for the most part all segregated. Women can run for the Majlis, but they only take up about 3% of the overall population. They cannot run for president, and there are a lot of female doctors and government employees, so it's not like they don't exist in society, but they only represent 33% of the labor force. This, of course, is also a drag on the economy. If you let, both the genders have opportunities in the workplace, that's going to create economic growth. It's not happening in Iran, even though that women in Iran do have greater access and opportunity than a place like Yemen or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, even. Okay. Um, they kind of it's almost like segregation, separate but equal. But in Iran, it's called equality with difference. So divorce and custody laws clearly favor males. Women, of course, must wear hijab. Usually, no tight-fitting clothing. Hijab is your headscarf. You must wear it. Uh, and bad hijab is punishable by lashes and time in prison. You're not allowed to leave the country without a consent of a male relative. When you get out into the country, stoning of women for adultery is not uncommon. And then, really, any discussions about women's rights at all is actually illegal, which is why the Masha Amini protests, as we'll see in 2022, were such a big deal. To enforce all of these laws on women, you have the morality police. These are an actual law enforcement that goes out and makes sure that women are conforming to social norms. Men too, like in terms of like there can't be any kind of public displays of affection, everything from holding hands or whatever, drinking of alcohol, being rude towards women. Morality police will take care of you if you're doing that. So it does go some towards the men, but it's mainly for women and hijab. This brings us to Masa Amini, a Kurdish woman who was not wearing proper hijab. and she was beaten to death by the morality police in 2022. This led to the Women Life Freedom Movement, the largest protest social movement going back to the Green Revolution. You had hundreds of thousands of people protest out in the streets. Women were ripping off their hijabs and throwing them away, and just basically in a form of activism, going out in society and not wearing hijab. Um, Many protesters died from the morality police or security forces, mainly young women. This led to, again, a very public condemnation from countries around the world. In the end, however, for about a year, women were able to last without wearing hijab. But then the government in 2024 and late 2023 started to crack down harder. The morality police have come back out, and women are being pressed into getting back and conforming to with traditional Sharia law. Not everybody has to follow that, though. Some examples of the inequality where wealth can get you above the law is the Instagram account Rich Kids of Tehran, which has come out, and you will notice there's alcohol. Men and women are fraternizing together in Tehran. They're clearly not what you would consider, Islam, Sharia-based appropriate, and so a lot of people have creates a loss of legitimacy in the government. Again, not only do you have these oppressive laws towards women, but if you have the money or the connections to the elites, then you can get away with not having to follow that at all. The last thing we want to address, again, that could be referenced in terms of protests, again, oil is the primary driver of the economy in Iran. And if we get into like 2017, 2018, you notice that it peaks up here and then takes a pretty significant nosedive. And when gas prices like start to rise, when inflation happens, when there aren't goods and services available, when the economy dives because of the reliance on oil, that rentier state, that resource curse, you're going to get, um, popular. There have been a variety of economic riots, but 2017, 18 in the wintertime was one that was greater. And again, the push towards the president of Iran is, being a cleric and that kind of thing, not really popular with the middle class and above. So you see this delineation in society. Remember, poor Muslims are going to have a greater connection. Part of that is the charity-based connection as well to the clergy, to the ayatollahs, to the Islamic State. When you get the middle upper class, you're going to get that drive to a more secular state. Okay, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran.